welcome to the second last of People, Work and Organisation series, and we're going to be talking about organisational culture. However, I've been talking for quite a few hours, so my voice is getting all husky and somewhat sore. So let's see how we can get through this one. So organisational culture is, the basic pattern of shared values and assumptions within the organisation. This is a range of different definitions, system of shared meaning, and I like this one. This is one of the traditional ones based upon the first work by Bauer in 1966, The Way We Do Things Around Here. And that's the kind of unspoken, unwritten elements of an organisation. So it's nice to think about this as having, remember, surface diversity, deep diversity. We've got a similar thing here with the culture. Surface characteristics and deep characteristics or underlying aspects. So these surface things most typically can include, physical structures, the way the building is set out. The glass, people who live in glass towers are better paid than ones who live in and have more prestigious jobs than ones who live in brick single-story buildings. We all know that's to be true, but this also relates to the surface characteristics, also relates to the language and the rituals, and you'll notice as we go through it, the stories and the legends, that we're beginning to use language that you more typically find in anthropology and archaeology, and you might, or particularly anthropology, and you might recall that early on, the very first lecture we had, we talked about the different elements of organisational behaviour, which is really what people, work and organisations is about, and how, there's very dominated by psychology, which is my field, but also with a good slice of sociology built in, and quite a thin slice of anthropology. Well, we're getting into the area here that is that anthropological slice of organisational behaviour. But, the underlying aspects of this culture is the unspoken and hard to even photograph elements of an organisation. So values, beliefs, mental models, behavioural prototypes. The behavioural prototypes may well be something that you could begin to see, but it's certainly not, it's there and then it's gone. It's not like these physically visible elements of culture and recordable elements of culture. So they are easy to see and measure and often hard to pin down. And whereas these things tend to unify organisations, these values can and do vary between individuals within an organisation, unless, of course, it has a very strong culture. And that's where we'll be looking at a little bit later some of the interesting examples of how a culture can begin to dominate the individual to the point that individuality is somewhat lost. Now, you can have two elements to these values and beliefs and attitude systems that we're talking about in this unspoken elements of culture. And they can be divided further up into things that are espoused or enacted. Now, espoused means the things that go into, for example, the mission statement of companies, where the company states, we are, we aim to be the best that we can be and produce quality and look after our staff and waffle like that. But the key question for a lot of people is, that's the talk, what's the walk? What kind of degree is that mission statement enacted? And so you've got these two different levels. Now, talking about enacted values, a great example, I think it's in the textbook, talking about BP, British Petroleum, which very fortunately for Britain is now known as BP and doesn't have too much Britain left in it, otherwise it would have been very bad for brand Britain. But, they had in their mission statement lots of talk about responsibility and the importance of staff and things like that. But the BP safety culture was very much called into question by what happened in the Gulf of Mexico with a huge oil spill that impacted on so many people's lives who were not shareholders of BP, bought or had anything to do with BP, but were impacted by its corporate lack of sense of responsibility. I just thought I'd point out, this, you can get off the net, you can get off Google Scholar, all sorts of these handy measures of different things. And one example I want to give, which I was quite familiar with, is Cox and Chain Safety Climate Measure, where they look at the safety climate of an organisation, and you can compare that with the espoused values and have a look at what is actually enacted within a company. And this type of thing is quite useful. You can get these measures, they're free, quite often free, and you can measure within your company or various divisions of your company this kind of level of safety climate, and then you can predict to some degree places that have a poor safety climate, and accidents and problems within that workplace can be attributed to a greater degree to the climate of the organisation and practices and culture, rather than to just bad luck, for example, or old machinery, for example. Now, organisations could differ, as we talked about previously, in their attitude towards, their strategy towards safety, innovation, cost savings, cost minimisation, for example, and that has impacts. Okay, so a way of breaking up into cultures. This is one of the methods. It's something that we've got in the textbook, talking about, for example, you can have an innovation focus, you can have a predictable stability focus. We've always been like this, a high people focus, high outcome focus, detail focus. You might find that, for example, in accountancy firms. This sense of team and collaboration, or an aggressive, low emphasis on corporate social responsibility. A number of different dimensions on which organisation cultures can differ. But another way of looking at it is dimensions between flexibility and control, internal focus, external focus. Often a monoculture, a culture of an organisation, can seem to dominate every aspect of it, but in reality, it ain't so. Very often, companies can have, a very well-functioning, strong culture within the accountancy department that might be precision-focused and detail-focused, and then a very loose, innovation-focused design department, for example. And there are ways in which companies can handle this division of cultures and do it in a way that works very well for the organisation. So you can have these dominant cultures on top and these subcultures beneath it, and they can help. These subcultures have all sorts of roles, particularly countercultures, in keeping the organisation loose and self-reflective, so that it doesn't become too complacent, particularly in relation to ethics and values. The whistleblowing subcultures, the dissenting voices within organisations can actually perform a pressure valve release or a monitoring function that's quite useful for the organisation. Now, organisational culture can also be seen through artefacts, and here we're really starting to get into a kind of language of anthropology or archaeology. The artefacts are the observable symbols and signs of an organisation's culture. And there's two ways of seeing these artefacts. You can see them as the centre of organisational culture, the very essence of it, or simply as an indicator of the way the culture should be or wants to be or could be. So we've got a number of different components towards how culture is expressed within the organisation. And remember those two layers, the espoused and the enacted as well. David Ogilvy is an early guru in marketing, so don't really need to know that, but he had these Russian dolls on his desk, which he often would take out for big meetings and use it as an illustration of how truth was embedded in other truth, etc., etc. The CEOs of organisations can be famous a little bit like, for example, Richard Branson, for his informal nature, his hairstyle, the clothes he wears, the fun orientation of his private life, which was reflected in his business life. And you can, to some degree, as a CEO or a manager, control these legends and stories that get told about yourself, but sometimes, unfortunately, they have a life of their own and the truth might out. This also, particularly, I wouldn't say this is strong in Australian cultures, or Australian companies, but you can get these rituals and ceremonies. A common one would be the Employee of the Year, Employee of the Month, which does get enacted in some parts of Australia, but generally we're not a very ritualistic or ceremonious culture. Then, much more common is this insider language in the accountancy department, the programming department, that helps create a sense of group. And then these physical structures, like the Google Sleep Pods, or as I said before, the use of sandstone and glass and sculptures to kind of create a sense of what the company is about. A school that I studied as part of my research work a couple of years ago, one of the big reforms that the principal introduced was new uniform, which reflected where he wanted to take the school, repainting and putting new signs up, new logo, these flags and everything just completely changed to indicate, to flag, if you like, to everybody in the community, the school community and beyond, this place has changed. Okay, there is a degree, as I sort of hinted before, where organisations can become very strong and have almost cult-like aspects to it. And these two guys came up with this book, Built to Last, looking at successful habits and visionary cultures, and claimed that successful companies actually develop these strong cultures that are almost cult-like. Now, when you think about cults, I better not mention names, but cults have some very interesting characteristics, and this particular author, Kulik, and a group of researchers listed a few of them. I've just selected some here, and they include things like mind control. The cult tells me what to think. Get isolated from family and friends. Sleeplessness is encouraged. Just focus, focus, focus. Free time spent on cult activities, but also things like the leader is considered a godlike figure. And stop for a moment and think, to what degree is this true of successful companies? And there is a degree, as these authors have said, to which companies, not just successful companies, but companies with vision, do try to create this. They try to take over your life. You become so engaged with the work that it's hard to disengage. You begin to prioritize work over family, and bosses do gain the status of being, revered, respected, and highly dominant and influential creatures within the organisation. Big question is this good management? And we will touch on this. In fact, we'll touch on it right now. Strong cultures do perform better, but there are some provisos. So if the culture is operating non-consciously rather than consciously, it makes people feel they belong and helps them with sense-making. Now, I will talk a little further, but strong cultures refer, of course, just to reiterate, where culture is widely and deeply held, how well entrenched, how long-lasting those cultures can be. But I think one of the things that you need to take account of with these strong cultures, and the evidence is there, it's a little bit like some other aspects. I can't just quickly bring it to mind here of organisational behaviour, but if you have a single way of doing things, it's like group cohesion, group diversity we've talked about. If you have too great cohesion and a lack of diversity, which is characteristic of strong cultures, you lose some of the benefits that for example, conflict, some conflict, or some diversity, some lack of cohesion within an organisation can have or can give the organisation in terms of, ethical behaviour, for example, whistleblowing, in terms of creativity and innovation. And in case of quality decision making and lack of groupthink. So it's obvious, thinking back through our course, that there is definitely some weaknesses of strong cultures that you need to be aware of. So these strong cultures do tend to perform better and have happier staff, which are great, but it also has to be adaptive to change and have some kind of flexibility. Shouldn't be too extreme and not cult-like. And the culture has to fit the environment in which the company is operating, kind of obvious. So In relation to the environment, bigger companies need multiple cultures and different divisions in order to be able to cope with the fact that the society we live in is increasingly multicultural, and I mean it in a different sense to what politicians refer to it. I mean it as there is no single culture, there's no single kind of client, there's no single environment that you're operating with. And I've given previously the example of the American market, which isn't a single market, but many, many markets. The cult-like things, if cults aren't flexible, as I say, they discourage innovation and ethics, and you need to be adaptive. You need to be adaptive to the environment. And let's just quickly look at adaptive cultures. Is a culture in which staff are receptive to change, including alignment of staff to the environment and continuous process of improvement and reform. And it's an important term to keep in mind. The example, if you've watched the news and are particularly like me interested in media, you'll have noticed the destruction of News of the World, and it all comes down to an interesting culture that developed within News Limited, within this particular subculture of News of the World, where they just did what appears to have been illegal activities, and I won't make any particular statements about it, but there was evidence that phones were tapped of private individuals, including royalty, politicians, and ordinary people who were victims of crime, for example, to gain an edge in the news market. And News of the World, as a result of this anything goes culture, was destroyed. And it led to, it was one of the world's oldest newspapers, thousands of people employed, literally millions of readers. And to me, as a lover of media and a lover of newspapers in particular, a very sad moment to see, a great newspaper, 1843, established and destroyed by a powerful group of individuals who did do very well, but at the same time, their attitude helped bring down a great institution. So merging cultures. Imagine strong culture here, strong culture there, try and fit it together, problems. I won't show this, but what the textbook talks about is I'll just play it briefly, is the concept of a bicultural audit.
The divorce rate and the merger rate, success are about the same, about 50% at best. What gets them is what we call the jaws of culture. Turf issues, trust issues, resistance to doing things new way, winners and losers, all those things. We're trying to make the merger work, but those jaws of culture are just chewing them up.
That's actually a quick summary of that whole video. So this guy's Lawrence Sen. You can Google Scholar him, or Larry Sen, and he's out there. He's quite influential in the field of cultural problems associated with mergers and acquisitions. When you've got two different organisations and you want to bring them together, you've got a number of different basic strategies that you can help, which you basically need to choose from in order to carry out a successful assimilation. So assimilation is one of those strategies. It tends to take place where there is a powerful and a weaker partner, or where the two companies have relatively weak cultures, or one of the companies has a weak culture. You can have a dominant partner take over the weaker partner. That's the process of assimilation. Separation is where you've got two organisations that are very different, or have two very different but strong cultures, or geographically separated, or something like that. And this, we agree to go each go our own way kind of policy is often the best when you've got this kind of situation. In reality, this rarely happens because of ego. One of the companies who took over the other is led by a person who believes that they're right and wants to impose that right way, their way, onto the target. So takeover princes, we call them. Integration, where you combine two cultures into one composite culture. So it tends to be slow and somewhat risky. Can happen when both cultures are weak, or there's large overlapping areas in the Venn diagram. Deculturation, which is more aggressive than assimilation. So the dominant culture strips the old culture away, including all the artifacts, gets rid of the colour, repaints the planes, repaints the factory, brings in new machinery, sacks staff, often associated with job losses of staff who will not go with the new way. It's often slow, marked with union intervention and trouble and toil. So it's often stressful, it's often challenging. In order to achieve this in a basic sense, these 4 different strategies we talk about, you've got a number of different options. When I say change leaders, I don't literally mean you should change leaders, but leaders who lead change. And they can be people who embody the values that you want to change, or you can actually, these may be people who have the capacity to be visionary and express in sort of charismatic, transformational leadership style. One of the things that's interesting about change leaders is when you try and change things, there can be a degree to which it's very difficult to do so, because the impact of a founder on an organisation, this idea of sticky influence or residual influence that they have, is not to be discounted. Organisations that are founded often have the fingerprints of the founder on them for some time to come. Even when they leave or sell the organisation, there'll be people within the organisation who still have a basic allegiance to the founder. There's not much that you can do about that, but it's something you need to be aware of. Change the artifacts, and you need to align the new artifacts with desired outcomes, repaint, put new statues in, new logos, that type of thing. I just want to quickly bring your attention to this paper if you want to have a look at that. Don't forget to change your artifacts, cultural artifacts, from Higgins and McAllister from the Journal of Change Management. Good article to read about a very successful change in the nature of Continental Airlines, which was a beleaguered, twice bankrupted airline that was at the bottom of the airline rankings, and in a very short space of time, only 2 years, went from loss-making and despised airline to being one of the world's most admired airlines, and also one of the most profitable in a very competitive and difficult market. So it's a bit of an inspiring story about how you can achieve change. And also rewards. Of course, you can change the reward system within organisations so that things that you want to be expressed in the culture of the organisation get rewarded. So, for example, if you're quality orientated, you start to measure quality and then reward quality and shift things over. So, for example, with Continental, its end product aim, which included a lot of subsidiary aims or subsidiary values, was to be ranked in the top 5 airlines in the US, a very competitive market with about 20 major competitors there. It wanted to be in the top 5. And they rewarded staff for being in the top 5 with, I think, $65 a week, I think was the figure. Now, what was great about that particular reward system was that it was focused on a tertiary aim, not a focused micro aim, because you don't only become a top 5 airline in the States by having good service, by being reasonably economic and productive and good value for money, or being on time, for example. And of course, you can also socialize or change staff. And there's this issue of attracting, selecting, socializing staff, or you can get rid of them, of course, too. ASA theory is attraction, selection, attrition theory, and suggests that organisations have this natural tendency, as if there's anything natural about business, to attract, select and retain staff with values that align with the organisation's character. Attract means, you recruit and attract them, you select them. Companies that have got strong, desirable characteristics or cultures will attract people to come and try and get jobs with them. And of course, the companies themselves have the ability to select people. And also, there's this process, natural or unnatural, of attrition, where people who don't fit in tend to leave. Socialization is about learning and adjustment of the value to the values of the host organisation, and this process can be done deliberately, or it can be done incidentally by staff modelling appropriate behaviour, for example. So you can have induction ceremonies, but also cultures have their way of spreading a message through to newcomers. So textbook says socialisation is the process by which individuals learn the values, expected behaviours and social knowledge necessary to assume their roles within the organisation, which is a good short definition. Okay, process of the textbook talks about the process of socialisation, 4 stages, from pre-employment to the outcomes level. So pre-employment, when you recruit, you learn about an organisation even before you leaf through the jobs pages or online in seek.com or whatever. You learn about the organisation from its reputation, from media articles about it, from Googling about them. And you also learn during the recruitment process about, this is the way we do things around here. Remember that original definition of culture. And you've got this process whereby both sides of the party in this pre-employment stage tend to be lying to some degree. The recruiters are painting a rosy picture of the organisation, and they certainly won't give you a warts and all analysis. And you and your CV are putting the best polish you can upon your history. And so 2 packs of liars meeting each other at the stage of the recruitment process. One solution to this deceptive, unrealistic start is the realistic job preview, where you combine a bit of positive and negative in how you sell yourself and this as an organisation. And there's some evidence that this works. You do lose some staff at the interview stage if you tell the warts and all truth, but this greater honesty does tend to encourage greater loyalty, probably due to the fact, you don't want to breach trust at this very early stage of a recruitment process. You've got to at least, maybe not give all the warts, to use the English expression, but maybe just don't use so much makeup to cover the flaws of the skin of the organisation. Be a little bit more natural. So then there's this stage, this encounter stage, where you are new to the organisation and reality shock is common. Before you become an insider, and involves you gradually linking up with long-standing employees, learning about the company through that process we call socialisation, taking on new role behaviours, adopting values and attitudes that are consistent with your role and with the organisation's vision, and resolving conflict between your own life, your own values, and that of the organisation. And then the final outcomes, if you manage this process well, are motivated, loyal, satisfied staff with lower degrees of stress and less likely to leave the organisation. And that's it, 28 minutes, good going. One more lecture. I am trying to resolve all the marks as I speak for people work in organisation, and I hope to have pretty well all the marks for people who have submitted their assignments pretty much done today. Now, I don't have complete control over that because some of the marking is not being done by myself, but for Flex students, I think that we're good to finalise it today as I upload this. So good luck, and don't hesitate, as usual, to contact me. Thanks.